government is to create condition in the society, to create condition in the system, so that the growth takes place, inclusion takes place. Or when we say that government has to take initiative, initiative means good governance. And to my mind, good governance is nothing making complex things simple. When the system is complex, you develop policies, you develop system which is less complex, or you make complex system simpler. We have tried our best. It's not that we have not done that. Government tried, the policy makers tried, the system should be simpler. But certainly in a development process, in a formulation process, in a policy process, people learn with mistakes and it takes lots of time. So the focus, I say that by the economic growth is the focus, generation of money is the focus. If government wants to transfer those funds to the people, certainly with the rising income, government, the people can go for better food, better shelter, better clothing. But whether your income or government supported income is going to increase health and education or improve the health and education, there are questions. It may improve, it may worsen also. Why it can worsen? That is, you can see the loss of migrant to Western world, particularly in US. When you travel to US, lots of Mexican people and they have migrated to US. But migration to US, rising in income. With rising income, the food habits changed and they are getting the problem of obesity. So you cannot ensure that with rising income your health is going to improve. With rising your income, your quality of education is going to improve. So there can be two exceptions. As far as the goods are concerned, certainly your rising income or transfer of funds from the government, your consumption level can go high. But as far as the services are concerned, there is the education is concerned or health is concerned, it is not necessary that with rising income your health is going to improve or your education is going to improve. Now the first case comes, if we look at India, the growth has not been inclusive. So I will not say that what Professor Doshi said that riches become richer and poor become poorer. Riches certainly become richer, but poor is also become not more poor, his income is rising. Certainly not, the situation in India is not that poor is not becoming poorer, certainly the income is rising. But remember that when we are ensuring economic growth, the impact of growth on equity is not automatic. It's not that the income is rising, automatically the equity will also rise. So it is the policy interference has to be there. And why we emphasize on inclusive growth is, when growth is inclusive, it leads to, only it can be sustained. Growth can sustain only when it is inclusive. When growth is inclusive, it leads to development. And when there is development, it leads to prosperity of a country. And when there is a prosperity in the country, it is common, good for all the common people, whether it is rich or poor across the caste. Now, the first thing comes that why growth has not been inclusive. When we had the situation after independence, or particularly I will say that after 70s, or once Indira Gandhi joined as the Prime Minister, we had all the situation that we could exploit the global market in the sense all favorable conditions that labor is cheap. Why labor is cheap? Because people are poor. With cheap labor, with poverty-ridden country, we can produce goods and services which are labor intensive, which give employment to people. Certainly your labor is cheap, cost is less, certainly you can export goods, you can supply goods to global market. This has been the example of South Korea, Taiwan, China. They have adopted the same model with cheaper labor. They supplied goods which were cheaply made in the local market and exported. This model we could not adopt. The simple reason was because Professor Rajiv Gupta will not agree with me. I know that he is looking at me, but the simple logic is to my mind is when Indira Gandhi became Prime Minister. As far as I read about Indira Gandhi, I do not take much interest in politics. When Indira Gandhi became Prime Minister, she was made Prime Minister by the Congress party. she said she is a daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru, so everyone will be after her, and certainly she is new to the politics, so we can dominate her. But after some time, Indira Gandhi realized, and she created a new party, that is Congress I. But she was supported by the people who were from the socialist background, or you can say the socialist mind people, and we gone for complete control of the economy. Control system. That is, next banks will be owned by government, supply of petrol owned by the government, telephone owned by the government, sugar production owned by the government, all things controlled by the government, and the result was waiting list for everything. Booking scooters 7 years, booking telephone 2 years, getting ration 3 years, or 30 days, 40 days. So that was the situation. So in a control regime, one policy was is a certain industry, certain sectors, certain goods will be produced by only small scale industries. The reason simple was because small scale industry gave more employment to people. But we forgot the one thing, that in an international market you have to compete in terms of cost and the quality. Your cost may be lower, but SSIs cannot compete in the international market, and that we realized later on, and then we decentralized the system. Remember that the industry could not give employment to people who were looking for the employment, and the focus remained in India that majority of people survived on agriculture. And in agriculture we know we look employed, but we are not employed. 10 people in a family working on the same plot of land, but certainly the land does not have work for everyone. It may be having for 2 years, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. But what I will say the next case is, with this result, the development in India took place with the capital and skilled labor intensive. I will repeat, capital, either you have capital or you have the labor which is highly skilled. In the present situation, either the people are getting jobs who are highly skilled, means that you are employable in the market if you are highly skilled. So with this, that the industry or the development took place in a basically sectors which are highly capital intensive and highly skill intensive, like petroleum, financial services, automobiles, telecom. These sectors provided employment only to those people who are highly qualified, or you can say belongs to a certain strata of the society. It's not according to strata, because private companies look at how the person is going to deliver for my company. But when we say that this growth or this development has not led to any benefit to the poor, certainly it led to benefit of the poor also, because the simple logic is, when I am buying a car, we are looking for a driver. When we are opening a telephone store, we are looking for the storekeepers. So the question of when we are buying car, we are looking for mechanics. So second lot has given the employment opportunity, but the base difference is very high. If you look at the bases in the corporate sector and look at the bases in the informal sector like the non-traded services, you can say that the driver or the storekeeper or whatever it is, the gap is high. So income has gone up for the poor also, but income of the rich person has gone much higher. So I can say the disparity may have risen, but the income of poor person has certainly also gone up. Now the next case that comes, that is why government focused only on that, let us look for the growth, let us look for the empowerment of the people, because the simple logic we realized, that is, once you start growth, English में कहावत है basically that rising tide lifts all the boats. So then when we say rising tide lifts all the boats, the presumption with the basic assumption is that no boat has hole in its hull. If boat has hole, certainly that boat is not going to lift. Government in India or the government policies in India has gone from inclusive expenditure in place of inclusive growth or inclusive development. Inclusive spending, when I say, that is, spend money on various schemes, allow people to enjoy the benefits of the government schemes, but do not ask them to create capabilities. Do not ask them to work. Inclusive growth is a different aspect. When we say inclusive growth means create employment opportunity to the people so that their capabilities are made, they are not dependent on the government policies, so that they become the part of the system. But spending is required. I will not say that spending is not required, but that is the case that when you are spending money without expecting anything, this system you can continue for 50 years or 100 years or 200 years. The system will continue with like that. But only when the system can change, when we develop capabilities. Professor Doshi said that Professor Alag told him that he has allocated 2,000 crore for capacity building of poor people. There is now, we say, there is a skill development commission with the Prime Minister of India. Now the question is, how much money has been spent on that? Last 3 years I have seen, because that's what developed the period of Professor Dr. Manmohan Singh when he was Prime Minister. Every year, this is just basically they're playing with the data. You allocate 10,000 crores for skill development, but the question is you are not spending even a single paisa. Nirvaya fund, you allocated 1,000 crore, again you allocated 1,000 crore, but how much money government has spent? On budget, on paper, looks very good for skill development, so much money, for Nirvaya fund, so much money, for X scheme, so much funds allocated. But remember, those funds are not utilized. They are not targeted, they are not used for government, for economists like us. Basically it helps that 5,000 allocated in February 2014, that 5,000 crore will come back to me in the March 2015 next year. So government says the fiscal deficit reduced because that fund has not been utilized, so that becomes the income of the government. So on paper you allocate everything. Same thing happening with majority of schemes which are, you see almost 66 schemes Government of India runs. In addition, state government runs various schemes, but how much fund have been allocated, how much is spent, that remains the criteria for study. So here I am focusing unless you develop capabilities of people, this inclusion cannot take place, and capability is again important. If only 30% or 40% or 50% of society are working, people are working in a country, certainly economy can grow less. When 100% of population is contributing to the country, certainly the economy is going to certainly rise. Remember, this growth is important, the income of government is important, because if we cite examples from India, government is planning this right to education, schemes like Narega, they were planning for 90s. They could not afford because they did not have money. You see the economic growth 2004 onwards. Government has the power to implement Narega, right to education, X, Y, Z, because when we see the data from 2004 to 2010 of tax collection, it goes 6 to 7 times higher. So government is getting 6 to 7 times more revenue. So government is in the position to implement various schemes. So the implementation of various schemes, allocation of funds to various schemes is one area. Now I am coming to a different area, that what government policy adopts in real life, what is the mode of transfer to the people. First case is, the simple logic is that here no one disagree that people who are poor, they are not supported by the government. Everyone agrees with that funds raised by the government, being a welfare state, those funds should be transferred to the poor person. But there is a difference of opinion in how those funds are to be transferred. We have adopted a model, that is, the government has taken the responsibility of supplying goods and services to the poor. When we are supplying goods and services to the people, or you can say when the government has to transfer funds to the people, government has two options. One, a direct transfer. Without expecting anything from the person, you are transferring directly. Second case is that give them employment, develop their capabilities, they should be working somewhere, and then government is transferring the funds. So I have 100 crores, that 100 crores is to be transferred to the poor people. But there are two options, one through employment, that you are working on the certain project and then you are given salary or basis. Second option is you don't do any work, but we will be giving you funds. There is just one case. Second case is whether those funds are to be given in cash or kind. We have adopted the model that funds are to be given in majority of schemes except NREGA in kind. That if you are poor, if you are in 70s, the scheme was universal. Everyone can have ration card and go to a ration shop, go buy government subsidized food and other goods. Now we have certain other schemes that is BPL family or APL family can access to the store at a cheaper price. So government adopted the model of kind, except NREGA I will say. In kind model, the basic criteria was that government wanted to alter the consumption basket of the poor people. Why the consumption basket is? Because government said that if we transfer cash, the head of the family will use on liquor and he will not buy food. That was the case. Or he will not buy healthy food. Say with the midday meal, that children will get healthy food. Real life situation is very different. Now the case is that if I do not want to use that commodity, I can sell in the market also. Because government is supplying goods which are tradable in the market. I can buy rice from the ration shop or the government store and I can sell in the open market that no one can check. So, but the issue is with the PDS is that large size of leakages, and the famous quote by Rajiv Gandhi when he was Prime Minister, that only 15% of funds reaching to the poor, 85% are the leakages. That is the quote by the Rajiv Gandhi, the then Prime Minister. And the same situation, different studies indicate in case of NREGA, in case of midday meal, in case of ICDS, what the health scheme is. Now the case is that if goods can be retraded in the market, what is the point in supplying goods to the poor people? Why cannot think in terms of transferring the cash, or you can say direct benefit transfer? Another issue basically is that is public versus private provision. Whether those goods are to be supplied by the private sector or those goods are to be supplied by the private sector. Health supplied by the government, education supplied by the government, ration, grocery, food supplied by the government. What has been the result? Anyone go to the government hospital, anyone can access. But the result is, remember, government has a certain expenditure to make on health. Out of that certain expenditure, if 1.2 billion people are accessing that health, the share comes around 1 to 2 rupees or 10 rupees. If only 30% people are accessing that health and education, certainly the share can go right. So first case is that providing free health and education, free health, this does not serve the purpose until unless you just target the right person, that who need help. Why should I go to the government hospital and get free service when I can pay? And as a result, what you say is that when you ask any person, where are you going for checkup, when are you going when you get fever, okay, I am going to the private hospital, I will pay and buy the services. Free services is available in the local vicinity, but the person or the poor person is going to the private hospital or private school. Why I quote this is because when we come for education, I read one book when one of senior professor basically when he visited Gujarat during 1979 when there was a study on adult education. So he asked lots of poor people that are you sending your children to schools? They said no. In 1979 they said no. They said why? They said because we know the threshold level of employment, that unless my child does study for 14 or 15 years, he will not get employment. So because we say that we cannot afford for 15 years, So obviously I am not sending the child. Why? What's the point in sending the child for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years? It's better to work and earn some money. Same professor was the member of Finance Commission in the 13th Finance Commission. He again visited Gujarat during his visit to Gujarat. He asked the ladies working in Narega, what do you do with this money, the wages given to you? All ladies say that we will be sending our children to schools. He asked, which school? English medium, private school. Means the poor person or the lady working on Narega, she also realizes that is English medium and private school, not to the government school which is available free of cost. Look at the Bihar. Bihar indicates basically in case of education that poverty is high, but poor people are certainly preferring that my child should be going to the private school and the school has to be English medium schools, because now you can say this is the change in awareness, or you can say the change in empowerment. They realizes the importance of education and particularly in the English medium education. Next issue comes conditional versus cash transfers. Now government says or policy maker says that you can transfer cash to the people, but there should be conditional. Conditional means that if you are looking for the cash transfer in case of health, give the certificate to government employee that I was in the hospital. If you need cash transfer for education, give the receipt to the government officer that my child is going to school. This is what we are doing in the universities also. Whenever there is scholarship, we have to verify that this child is the part of the university, so please give him the fellowship. Now the question is that why we say the system is not manageable. You have to show the proof. But if I want to manage, I can manage the system also. If I am doubting the poor person, I can manage this system also. I can contact any college principal. Okay, please, this is the case, this is the voucher, this is the fund I am getting, and my child cannot be the part of school or he cannot attend the school. Can you give us a certificate? He can ask the doctor, can you give us the certificate? So if you, that's that case. And last case is, again we discuss whether the scheme should be universal or targeted. It should be free to all, that everyone can enjoy the scheme, or it should be well targeted. When it comes to targeting, the people, particularly NGOs, support that no, it should be universal. And NGO nowadays have a lots of weightage in government basically, that they say no, it should be universal. And the recent example is that people forced last government to foot the food security bill. Why? Because the people were saying, no, the scheme should be universal. There are not only 40% people who are BPL, there are 75% people whom we should be giving benefit. Give benefit, but have you changed the scheme? You are following the same model. Go to the ration shop, get the grocery. Rice is 2 rupees, wheat at 1 rupee or 3 rupees, whatever it is. Now the question is that if you are looking that the person is getting benefit and that it should be universal, same issue comes. Limited income, large basket of consumers, the subsidies or the amount are thinly allocated to people. I am getting a share, I am not satisfied, and anyone other is not satisfied. So my point is simply is, so another issue is whether the scheme should be universal or the targeted scheme. My preference is basically that a scheme should be cash transferred and there is unconditional. Unconditional cash transfer with the targeted schemes with a provision of private provider that goods and services should be open to government and private sector both. It is the choice of the consumer from where he wants to utilize the services, buy those goods. Don't put any condition when you are transferring cash to his account. And the third case is that targeting is important. Schemes cannot be universal. People have objections that targeting is very difficult to define. How you say that who should be included, who should not be included. My simple logic is that we can go for exclusion policy. Don't go for inclusion policy. Go for exclusion policy. At least exclude those people who are not poor. And identification is very simple. The government can do it if they want. That if I am living in a rural area, I own motorcycle, I own house, I have land. I am sitting in an urban area, I have house, I have vehicle, I have telephone. So these cases can exclude people that you do not deserve this scheme. So in place of going inclusion, if at least we go for exclusion principle, or at least, and we let's say visualized in place of 40%, you will have 50% BPL families. It does not make any difference, but you have to target who needs assistance. Don't give it to everyone. We are availing it. For last, whosoever is driving basically diesel vehicle, everyone is using LPG at home. Diesel vehicle, I am buying a SUV worth 20 lakhs, going to a petrol pump, and say fill up my tank, and you know that the government was providing almost 50% as the money for the diesel, you are paying only 50% of the price. For what? We could not exclude basically those people. When I can buy a vehicle of 20 lakhs, I can afford the diesel also. And now government has realized later on that increase the price, and it should come equivalent to the petrol price. Now, let's go to the basic schemes. I will just highlight where the lacuna exists. First, I will target the first scheme for inclusion government focused, which was different basically, that is NREGA. People say that NREGA should be stopped, this should be the leakages, the X, Y, Z. But one thing is very clear, that NREGA is the one program which has transferred maximum purchasing power in the hand of the people, poor people. No scheme, except you say whether the food, subsidy on fertilizer, subsidy on water, subsidy on X, Y, Z, including health and education. This much purchasing power has not been transferred by any scheme. NREGA is the first scheme which has given cash in hand. And that's why I always ask the government or any people who oppose, if when you could trust poor people in case of NREGA, why didn't you transfer the wages in kind? Why didn't give him the food or clothing or education fees in place of transferring the cash? When you are opposing other schemes that they cannot be transferred cash because the poor person does not know how to make better use of it, then why you did not adopt the same model in NREGA? Because NREGA was the latest scheme, so government realized that we should transfer the purchasing power in the hands of the poor. So one thing is very clear, that maximum cash transferred by the NREGA in the hands of poor people, and we see the change. What is the change? The consumption basket of poor has gone totally changed, completely changed. People criticize, that is, even Prime Minister said, and I say that is very derogatory, that there is inflation in the market because not the present Prime Minister, the last Prime Minister, there is inflation in the market because poor people are creating demand for better goods. They are creating demand for butter, they are creating demand for milk, they are creating demand for eggs, they are creating demand for vegetables. That's why these goods are getting more expensive, and that is the core reason for inflation. They have all the right. It is the responsibility of the system to supply a higher amount of goods and services in the market so that the price does not rise. That is, the NREGA proves that if we transfer cash or purchasing power in the hands of the poor, certainly their consumption basket is going to change, the poverty is going to reduce, and what we always criticize India for malnutrition, this nutritional aspect will also be taken care of by that scheme. But when we discuss NREGA against the direct cash transfer, that is, NREGA has leakages. Why there are leakages? Because the 75% or 70% money is basically for wages, and 30% is to be on the asset creation in the rural development schemes, that you have to create certain asset and buy machines, whatever you want to use. That construction is not permanent. The asset creation is not permanent. When asset creation is not permanent, there is no accountability whether that work has been done or not. Today you dig a tank, next day you say, "Sab आंधी आई थी, कल वापस बन गया, मुझे वापस लेबर वहाँ पर employ करना है." So that is leakages issue is there. But once we compare NREGA with the direct cash transfer, that is in place, government allocates 33,000 crores to NREGA every year. if this 33,000 in place of transferring to Narega scheme, if we transfer these funds directly in the people who are working on the ground, then situation would have been very different. Then Narega looks like that cash transfer is much better in comparison to Narega scheme. Now people argue that they are doing work. I say that even in the case of cash transfer, you visualize that there will be leakages, which is impossible actually. Even you visualize that these 30,000 crores, there will be leakages of suppose 30% or 11,000 crores, only 22,000 crores will reach to the poor person, but poor person will be free to work elsewhere. He can go and work anywhere and generate wages. So he is getting money as well as he is free to work everywhere. Now you can say, how will the asset creation will take place in rural areas? I visited lots of rural areas. I never seen that, but I see one board, that road developed through Narega scheme or tank digged with the Narega scheme. But here is the tank. What is the situation of that road? That is a different story. And the real life story is because money in asset creation is to be supplied by the government of state. State government does not have that type of funds. That's why they are not going for permanent construction. Permanent construction means it's a very strict system. I want to construct a building for a school. You do not hire workers from the market. You hire the workers who are working on Narega. But that much asset to be supplied by the state government, and the state government does not have money. So here I will say, just when you are abolishing Narega, please transfer those direct funds in the accounts of the people and just tell them you are free to work elsewhere. Now there are criticism that if you are again supplying free of cost without asking any work, but that work is not helping them. Number one, you cannot continue with a person for working for 30 years or 40 years to working on a road or working on a construction site. You are not developing his capabilities. Means we have visualized these people working under Narega scheme is they have to work throughout their life on the same schemes. That cannot work. They will never be the part of the system. Another issue, basically, another scheme I would what I want to highlight is that is not going into detail. That is let's take food nutrition.
I think we are running short of time.
Just I will take just 5 minutes. Food nutrition. I will just not go into detail, but food security bill is impossible to implement. Even government wants, government can ensure 100%, but this cannot be implemented. Like health, my clear vision is that in case of minor illness, when people the cold, cough, fever, he should be allowed to visit private hospital or public hospital. It is the choice of the consumer. For that, government can again transfer direct cash, and economist has done calculation. It costs only 4.4% of GDP if we are transferring 2,000 rupees per person for minor illness like cold, cough and fever. And in case of major illness, Karnataka has explained, that is Ishitni Yojana of Karnataka has explained that government or the societies has to go in case of group insurance for major illness, because major illness is basically the cost expensive and you cannot predict in advance. But I will just conclude with one thing. What all these schemes or what policy says, that once we started implementing this scheme, there can be I want to speak from my heart basically that loss of government scheme. One I want to add at the last, it may be controversial basically, that is the reservation in government jobs. Or you can say affirmative action, whatever you as a socialist you want to say. This scheme is that, to my mind, that once you avail or once you become the part of the system, you should be excluded from that. That is, you should not be allowed to avail this facility. But what is happening? Once I enjoy it or once I become the part of the system, my next generation is availing the same facility. So where we are talking of inclusion, that's why our focus is this adopt exclusion principle. Once you are the part of system, you will be excluded from that policy. Now, at last, in economics, we basically study game theory. When we say game theory, or when my students ask game theory, so game theory says that you have to read the mind of your opponent also. When you are playing cards, certainly you have to read the mind of your opponents also, what he is thinking. For this, we say that is strategic thinking. When students ask what is the game theory, so I tell them only one story and then will end with that, because why that story is completely suits to the Indian policy system, that once we adopted, we are continuing with that. So I tell them one story, that is there is a hat seller who is selling hats. His grandson, almost 10 years old, accompanying him during the selling period. One day he goes off to sleep under a tree. So when he wakes up, then he sees that all hats are vanished and the monkeys are sitting on the tree wearing all the hats. So in frustration, he thrown his hat, what he was wearing, all monkeys thrown his hats. So once or twice it happened, and he thrown his hat, monkey thrown their hats, and he picked up. And the process continued for 10 years, 15 years. The old man died, the grandson took over the business. Same story repeated with him. So again he said, he thrown his hat. One monkey comes down, give him one thresh, and takes the hat which he thrown away, and he tells him, do you think only you have the grandfather? Yes. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. If there is any question, any queries, I will be more than happy to reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vijayveer Singh. I wish we had more time. Sorry to restrict you. Professor Vijayveer Singh, a very different version of inclusion, exclusion is in this discourse we have got. He has mainly discussed different government-run schemes with regard to making the beneficiaries to the sections which are deprived or marginalized or neglected, so on and so forth. I am not going to discuss that, but his thesis was that we should adopt a policy or a mechanism with regard to distributive systems whereby the real needy persons get what they are, we can say, to be given by the government schemes. And instead of using the inclusive policy, he advocated for the exclusive policy, where he says that the sections which have already, we can say, received the benefits of various policies, they should be excluded so that they cannot become repetitive beneficiaries, so on and so forth. We are really late now, almost maybe half an hour or so. We have a couple of more papers to present. I would invite one by one, but only I'll request that they should short their presentation, limiting just to 2 minutes. If possible, they can just give their findings. So I'll just call one by one. Dr. Archana Gupta. Yeah, just final observations.
Namaskar, I'm Archana Gupta and my topic is Social Inclusion in the United Nations Agenda. The World Summit for Social Development held at Copenhagen in 1995 gave a very good definition of inclusive society, basically a society in which every individual has every rights, responsibility, active role to play, and all human beings have fundamental freedoms, religious and cultural diversity, social justice, and special needs of vulnerable and disadvantaged group are being heard and addressed to. But the point is, did social inclusion originate in 1995? No, certainly not. It is part of every society, every culture, every race, every corner of the world since times immemorial. Yet it took centuries for the world to acknowledge it, finally acknowledge it. And all of a sudden, the carriers of globalization came up with the term social inclusion. And ultimately, the world government took it and came up with their own solution of social inclusion and gave their own agenda that was known as the Millennium Declaration of 2000. Yet again, we have the example of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a noble idea, a very good cause, but could not be implemented without the active participation of the member countries, their governments and their societies. And as something that the world is still struggling to achieve. In the core of every political move, there is a societal imperative at work. And the same is applicable to social inclusion as well. And ultimately, social inclusion cannot be achieved without addressing that core social imperative. And there is a high degree of political salience in the issue of social inclusion. Achieving greater social inclusion is a political imperative that all the countries of the world have to realize individually and collectively. Thank you very much.
Each individual speakers. Now I request Deep Shikha Parasar.
Today I am going to speak on ensuring social inclusion through constitution in India. Social inclusion is a process of improving the terms on which people take part in society and where all people feel valued and their differences are respected and their basic needs are met. Especially in a country like India where we have so much of diversity on the basis of culture, religion, languages and ethnic group that to maintain equilibrium among us is a challenge. Recognizing the existence of diversity supports a different approach to nation building, and this approach to nation building is based on a notion of pluralism. The pluralism as a distinct approach to nation building creates an enabling environment whereby diverse religion, culture and tradition can coexist in a nation. The preamble of Indian Constitution enshrines liberty, equality and justice to all natives of the country to foster pluralism and social inclusion. The social pluralism of India is also fortified by the unique concept of secularism and socialism. We can say that the various provisions of Indian Constitution clearly and firmly point out to mainly one direction, that we are multilingual, multiracial Indian society interwoven into an innate thread of national integration. But merely giving and constitutional rights and launching their scream do not reflect the ground reality, as still poor and weaker sections of the society are vulnerable and feel excluded from the mainstream. The constitutional provisions are there to act as a guide to the government regarding the societal needs and means to tackle them. The government is not able to work on them in the absence of societal support. So in this way, it comes to a full circle, that is, starting from the society and ending on the society with the constitution and the government in the loop. We need to create a policy document to guide India towards adapting meaningful process of inclusive and equitable growth, so that the due visibility is given to all the categories of communities as well as social and cultural disabilities are appropriately addressed. Thank you.
My topic of the research is empowering women through intervention program on embroidery for the upliftment of the society. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has quoted that women should be uplifted for the upliftment of nation. And if woman is uplifted, then women in society is uplifted. The main objective of the study was to enhance the knowledge and skill of the women. The methodology of my study was to train women for 3 months in the Vidyadhar Nagar, and 25 women were imparted the training who were enthusiastic, eager and passionate to learn the embroidery. The schedule was a 45 days training, where the women were taught the basic stitches, what are the different types of stitches, what are the how the product can be made, how they can trace the design of the fabric, and how the product can be developed from this. You know the gain knowledge of well-structured interview schedule was prepared to know about whether the woman had the knowledge about the things, and a pre-test schedule was invested on them. And after the training, they were again administered the same questionnaire to know about the result of the data. To know the skill development, they were asked to prepare the articles, and they were categorized into three categories: highly skilled, semi-skilled, and less skilled. These were the materials that were provided to them, and they did the work with the stitch, needle thread, dabka, fabric glue, mukka, danta plates, mirror, dori, and everything. This was the process of tracing the design from tracing on the fabric on the sheet of paper to tracing on the fabric paper top. Then the various type of stitches were taught. These were the various stitches that were being taught to them. Chain stitch, back stitch, stem stitch, buttonhole stitch, satin, cow chain, coat. These were the socio-economic profile of the artisans, so that the age group were 56% belonged to the age group of 20 to 25 years and 14% between 18 to 21 years old. The education level was not very much high. 52% have studied till middle level, and the marital status showed that 64% were married and rest were unmarried. And the family type showed that 60% belonged to the joint family and 40% to the nuclear family. And the family income was very meager. 48% earned between 2,000 to 3,000. So the training was given to them so that they can learn the art and generate the employment for themselves, and to pass this to the younger children also. And the employment status showed that they were. And after the training, to know the knowledge, in the pre-training, the 76% had the low level of knowledge, and 34% had medium level of the knowledge. And then after the training, they had 52% of the medium level of knowledge, and 48% had attained a high level of knowledge. The result shows that there was a great mean difference between the result in the post-training and pre-training, and it had a significant, the t-test has a significant as 0.01 level. Next. This was a training that was imparted to the women in the Nagar. After they were asked to develop different types of products, where 52% have achieved semi-skilled, they were semi-skilled according to the quality of the work, 2% highly skilled, and 16% were less skilled. Right. These were the products that were being developed by them, all the contemporized products. And the conclusion of Master Environment program had an impact on the trainees, which helped them to be self-reliant and create opportunity for them. Value addition of product with the help of embroidery would help them to start the work, earn money, and improve their livelihood, and thus prevent them in searching for jobs away from their homes. They can do the work at their home, and constant efforts in developing skills and momentum training would help them in capacity building, which ultimately leads to economic empowerment and improve the position of the women in the society. Thank you.
Thank you. Sulekha Ojha. Now I request Dr. Rajesh Kumar.
Good afternoon, respected Chairperson and Organizing Committee. I am Poonam Singh, going to present a research paper entitled Social Inclusion Through Sports, Case of Children Delinquents. Introduction. Sports and physical activities play a significant role in contemporary society. Indeed, sports and physical activity have great meaning for many peoples. Basically, sports can be categorized under two categories. The first one is the individualized sports, and second, team sports. As you can see that the sport means all forms of physical activities which leads to the physical fitness. By looking to a slim girl, we cannot conclude that she is physically fit. For that comment, we should understand that what is physical fitness. Basically, physical fitness is ability of an individual to complete daily tasks without undue fatigue, and also has ample of energy for emergency situation and leisure time activities. The limitation of sports are as follows. The first one is the lack of research. Second, difficulties in measuring claimed effects. And the last one is the many sports effects are indirect. Juvenile delinquency. Juvenile delinquency is a very serious matter in the society. It can be defined as that juvenile delinquent is a person under the age of 18 and commits an act that otherwise would have been charged as a crime if they were an adult. The seriousness of juvenile delinquency and victimization. Children and youth are victims of theft and violent crimes. Some juveniles are victims of abuse and neglect at the hands of their parents and other caregivers. The term dependent and neglect children describe those who are not provided with proper shelter, food, clothing, clean and safe living conditions and medical conditions. Child victimizations has been linked to problem behaviors, delinquency and criminal behavior later in life, that is the adulthood stage. Sport and social participation. There are several therapeutic potentials of sports. The first one is that the juveniles at risk are removed from criminal culture of their peer groups and mixed with more positive role models. Second one, sports encourages development of self-discipline. Third, it provides an antidote to boredom. And the last, sport addresses certain adolescent development needs for adventure, excitement and autonomous. I can give an example relating to Kabaddi. As we know that initially, Kabaddi was regarded as a rural areas game. But after the TV show telecasted on the TV, that is Pro Kabaddi League, there is so much social involvement, social participation in that particular game. Reducing crime through sports. There is a little evidences that punitive sanctions such as juvenile correction centers, shock incarcerations, community service hours, example gathering garbage on roadsides, or boot camps have been effective at reducing juvenile crime. According to many criminology experts, the most effective way to reduce juvenile delinquency is the organized sports. It is unrealistic to claim that organized sports alone can reduce levels of juvenile delinquency in society. The causes of juvenile crime is complex and multidimensional. But the benefits of organized sports can be summarized in some points. The first one, keeps young people busy and out of trouble. Second, make young people feel empowered, increase feeling of connectedness, develop problem-solving skills, foster teamwork, develop cognitive competency, develop decision-making skills, provide employment opportunities. Organized sports can prevent juvenile delinquency by developing capable, mature and responsible youth. Conclusions. There are strong theoretical arguments that for the potentially positive contribution that sport can make to reduce the propensity by young people to commit crime, there are many evidences which supports that the combative events, for example judo, wrestling, self-defensive games, will reduce the crime as we can just express our anger, aggression and stress through them. Crucially, sport is at its most effective when combined with programs that address issues of personal and social development. It appears that playing sport will not lead to a permanent reduction in crime by itself. Successful programs require a variety of other support mechanisms to be placed. At last, I would like to say one para that the IIS University Department of Physical Education, headed by Dr. Renu Shunglu ma'am, always promote participation in sports and physical activities which will reduce the thinking which can transfer to the crimes. And I always thank you ma'am for always supporting, encouraging and motivating in all positive aspects. Thank you ma'am. Thank you sir.
Thank you, Poonam Singh, for a very different strategy, highlighting a very different strategy for inclusion and taming the juvenile delinquency problem. Anyway, I invite Ms. Smriti Patil.
A very good afternoon, everyone. My topic is Indian media accentuating gender-based exclusion. Media, often termed as the whistleblower watchdog of society, not only merely reflects the notions and ideas prevalent in it, but also shoulders the onus of shaping them in a way that is healthy, positive and fair in the long run. But many a times media, even though aware of a bias, publishes or broadcasts stereotypes saying that the mass wants it. One such issue that requires urgent and utmost attention of Indian media is gender inequality and biases prevalent in our society. While on the one hand, 2012 report of World Bank on Gender Equality and Development estimates that around 2.5 lakh girls were killed in India due to their sex over the last 20 years, the 2011 census on the other shows that the sex ratio in the age group 0 to 6 had fallen in 21 states and union territories since 2001. Media undoubtedly plays a vital role in shaping our disposition towards women. Now, I have conducted certain case studies of Indian advertisements and some films, on basis of which I present you some examples which may be relevant. Media images and mass messages in advertisements help children in constructing identity by presenting gender roles as the norm. The woman of the consumerist era is idealized neither as an enlightened mother nor as a self-fulfilled working person deriving fulfillment from creativity both in realms of the body and the spirit as the equal partner and companion of the man in the process of living. A consumerist society puts the woman on the pedestal of the glamorized sex object alone. Her supreme purpose becomes provide titillation to the male-dominated world. For instance, the brand Thumbs Up has always had only macho males like Salman Khan as its brand ambassadors to suit its punchline that taste the thunder and thereby represent strength, while Katrina Kaif is sensuously portrayed in the Aam Sutra advertisement of Slice. It's always Hema, Rita, Jaya or Shushma showed concern with washing clothes for Nirma rather than men. Most often women are shown doing household chores and men working in offices. The vice versa of the aforementioned rarely happens. Images of scantily clad women in suggestive and revealing poses are being used to sell all from mouth fresheners to deodorants today. Insurance companies in their ads generally talk about saving for a daughter's marriage and a son's higher education, while a contrary portrayal seldom happens. Now, similarly, we have gender biases in films also, which consolidates such kind of exclusion of women in the society. Events from history give us enough reasons to believe that rapes happened because women were considered as the honorable belongings of men. In olden days, when kings or clans fought, they took away each other's land, wealth and women. Hindi films too portrayed as women as worthiest possession of men. Be it spoiled brats of zamindars or daku or a filthy villain, their devil would find a way out by molesting or raping a woman. Not only this, women's existence was portrayed vain after she was raped, reflected through monologues and dialogues of Bollywood cinema. Like मैं अपवित्र हो गई हूँ और for that reason मैं आपके लायक नहीं रही, who eventually commits suicide. Such depictions further victimize the victim by consolidating notions like women raped is not worthy enough to be married and hence deserves social exclusion or boycott. Similarly, scenes of docile, delicate heroines waiting for a macho man to come and save her from the clutches of the villain consolidate the image of women as powerless and dependent entity. There are many movies in contemporary cinema also which show women as mere objects of sexual pleasure. The scenario is definitely changing but very slowly and on a minuscule level, resulting to a large extent from the impetus provided by United Nations Decade for Women in 75 to 75 and enactment of certain acts like Indecent Representation of Women Act 1986, protests and campaigns of media monitoring groups like Committee on Portrayal of Women in Media, Ahmedabad. Mass mediums in India have initiated action, altered codes and thought over the issue of unethical, biased and stereotype portrayal of women. Studies like that of Munshi also states that portrayal of women has changed but only slightly. I would like to conclude by saying that though media alone cannot remove the biases against women in our society altogether, that has resulted from centuries old subjugation, yet it can play a vital role in taking conscious initiatives to bring men and women at par and stop justifying the status quo. Given the commercialization of Indian media in context of market economy today, restricting commoditization of women would not be a mere cakewalk for the mass media. So this I would like to end my presentation. Thank you for such a patient hearing.
Thank you, Smriti.